So hey guys, it's Ziont again, and it's regular commentary time! Woo! I just got finished watching Xbox Ahoy's bonus, which would have come out almost a week ago as this is going up. But I had a really interesting, he's told a really interesting story, I should say, about his first experience with it, with a company called, what in England is called Game. It's basically the GameStop of the UK, and I think Europe as well. I don't know if it extends beyond, but he told a story about his first experience with game, and he grew up in a time when there weren't really all that many gaming outlets, whereas today we had, like when I grew up, we had Blockbuster, Funco Land, EB Games, and GameStop was still coming up. But for him, he's a little older even than I am, and so when he was young, there wasn't much in the way of means to acquire video games. And game for him offered this bit of solace, of hope about the hobby that, to that point, and even when I was younger, was still a very niche market. It was still very, you were kind of an outcast or an outsider if you played and really enjoyed video games. And I wanted to share a little bit about my first experience. I did a gaming history series early in my channel for BF3, but I'd never shared this story because I never thought to share it. Xbox Ahoy, being the great commentator and great idea guy that he is, has gotten me thinking about this. And it's simple. I lived in a semi-rural area in the north of Indiana, and there, again, the first console I had was the N64. And I got, of course, that console came with, at least for me, my parents also got me Super Mario 64. But again, it was not the widespread thing it is today. There was no online. If you wanted to play a game with your friends, you had to go to their house. There was actual like physical social interaction that had to happen, which to some of you may be a surprise. Point being is there wasn't, for me as well, there wasn't really a good way to acquire a game. I could go to Blockbuster and rent one, certainly. I could go to Funco Land, was what it was called. It was one right behind my house, and it was one of those things that I didn't know Funco Land existed for a long time, actually. And when I finally discovered it, much as Xbox Ahoy discovered, it was this really, really important part of our childhood, that there is this place that isn't just about movies. It's not just about getting stuff from movie nights, getting board games, getting that your parents shopped at mostly, but it was something that the kids could do as well. And you go into Funco Land, or EB Games, as another one of it was known. It was like, wow, there's nothing here but game stuff. There were Genesis games, Saturn games, N64 and PSX games, and all of it was it was wonderful to see. And like I say, there really was no good way to acquire video games back in the early 90s. Beyond going to Funco Land or renting from Blockbuster. There was no Amazon, eBay. The internet itself was in its early popular infancy, I should say. You could certainly still get it, and it had been around since at least the early 80s, but it wasn't mass market consumption, and AOL had just come out on floppy disks when I was really young. And I remember, and I talked about this in a couple commentaries, but I remember what really got me into gaming was not Super Mario 64. The N64, for all of the positives it brought to the industry, I loved Ocarina of Time. I loved Super Mario 64, but they didn't make me a gamer. They didn't. They didn't draw me into the wee hours of the morning. They didn't enrapture me. And if you know anything about my personal gaming history, you know that Final Fantasy VII was the game that made me a gamer. And I don't know if I've told this story, but I'll tell it again anyway, because I love telling this story. I went into Blockbuster one day, and I saw this game for the PSX, and I had a PSX at that point. I think I had Crash Bandicoot, which was one of the most frustrating experiences you can have on that game if you're not very good at games. I also had Mega Man and things like that. But I saw this game called Final Fantasy VII, and the cover art, judging a book by its cover, you should never do that, by the way, it didn't intrigue me. I thought this game looks like shit. Why would I would never enjoy this game. But I was bored, as 7, 8, 9-year-olds tend to be sometimes. And I said, you know what? I may as well give it a shot. I may as well just, oh, I'll pick it up. And so I picked it up on a whim. And I don't think I put that game down for some 3 or 4 days. It was like reading a novel that was visual, that for me was as close to the young adult Star Wars novels as I could ever be without reading them, and I was experiencing them. And it was one of those magical moments that you will never forget, and it's a fundamental part of what makes me a gamer and what makes me a person, because Final Fantasy VII gave me perspective. And that's something that I think that anything like that can do, is to give you a perspective. But before I get off into a philosophical tangent, let me get back to Funko Land and the death of mom and pop game stores. Or not the death of it, but just the story about it. The sad part of it is Funko Land, EB Games, these were stores that defined, at least for me and possibly my generation's access to games. These were games that they were chains, yes, but they weren't multinational corporations with all this clout, all this power. And people complain about how GameStop is ruining the industry with all these pre-order incentives, that it's pulling publishers in with these offers. But Funko Land didn't have that. EB Games didn't have that. It wasn't until GameStop started subsuming these things that this happened. And Xbox Ahoy expressed a little bit of that regret as well, because Game for him, it was a storied franchise. It was something that really allowed him to blossom as a gamer, because it was the first company that it was small. It catered to him and him alone. And it was something that wonderful part of what it meant to be Stuart Brown as a child, who loved games, who loved the thought of playing them even when he couldn't. And while the circumstances are very different for me, the feeling, I think, is the same. And I think that's what really matters.